I have studied death for 31 years. Not the concept of it. Not the philosophy. The mechanics. The biology. The cold, measurable reality of how living things end. I have catalogued 10,247 species across 43 star systems. I have watched predators and prey, warriors and farmers, hive minds and solitary hunters. I have filed reports on creatures that could crack a moon's crust with their bodies, and creatures so fragile that a change in atmospheric pressure dissolved them into vapor. In 31 years, I have never filed an incomplete report. Until now. The file on my desk, if you could call the glowing holographic stack a desk, has been open for 6 rotations. 6 rotations without a single word added to it. My superiors have sent 3 inquiries. I have not answered them. The file is labeled Species 10,248, Designation, Human. Planet, Earth. System, Sol. I don't know where to begin. That has never happened to me before either. Let me start with what I expected. When the Accord's long-range probes first flagged the Sol system, the initial readings were underwhelming. A single inhabited planet. 1 moon, uncolonized. No presence beyond their own atmosphere. Primitive faster-than-light theory, barely sketched in their academic records. A species that had only recently, by galactic standards, stopped killing each other over the chemical composition of their soil. The preliminary classification came back as Category 3, developing. Non-threat. Low priority. Standard procedure for a Category 3 is a passive observation file. You assign a junior analyst. You check in every 50 cycles. You wait for them to either develop or collapse. Most collapse. I was not assigned to this file. I chose it. I chose it because of one anomaly in the probe data. One line in 1,000 pages of unremarkable readings that stopped me cold. Subject species has been in continuous, large-scale internal conflict for approximately 97% of its recorded civilization. Conflict does not appear to have inhibited technological or cultural development. Correlation analysis, inconclusive. I read that line 4 times. Every other species we have ever observed that engaged in prolonged internal conflict showed one of 2 outcomes. Either the conflict consumed them, resources depleted, populations fractured, civilization collapsed inward like a dying star. Or the conflict was resolved, a dominant faction emerged, and the species unified under that faction's structure. Humans had done neither. They had been tearing themselves apart for thousands of years and somehow, simultaneously, building cathedrals, writing symphonies, splitting atoms, mapping their own genome, sending machines to the edges of their solar system. I requested full observation access that same rotation. That was 4 years ago. I have 6,000 hours of observation footage now. Translated literature. Intercepted communications. Cultural records spanning 3 millennia. I have watched their wars and their peace treaties, their disasters and their rescues, their moments of breathtaking cruelty and their moments of, I have no clinical word for it. The closest translation in Accord language is irrational self-sacrifice, but that framing misses something essential. Their own word for it is love. I included that word in an early report. My supervisor flagged it as a translation error. I did not correct him. The incident that broke my ability to file a standard report happened 42 rotations ago. We had upgraded to active observation, closer orbital sensors, real-time feeds. The Accord Council had taken a minor interest after my preliminary findings suggested humans might reach FTL capability within 200 cycles. Protocol required us to begin threat assessment modeling. Threat assessment. That's what started all of this. The modeling team ran standard parameters. Physical capability metrics. Weapons technology. Population density. Resource consumption. Territorial expansion patterns. The report came back in 6 hours. Threat level, negligible. The lead modeler, a young analyst named Surevdas, presented the findings with the quiet confidence of someone delivering obvious news. Humans were, by every measurable standard, fragile. No natural armor. No venom. No enhanced sensory capability. Average lifespan shorter than 17 other species currently under observation. Physically weaker than 42 species in the same developmental tier. Their weapons, while increasingly sophisticated, remained primitive compared to any spacefaring civilization. They are soft, Surevdas said. That was the exact word. Soft. The skeletal structure is remarkably brittle. The skin offers almost no protection. They require precise atmospheric conditions to function. They are vulnerable to temperature extremes, to radiation, to pressure variance. Honestly, Analyst Vael-Kiris, I'm not certain how they've survived this long. The room agreed with him. I did not say what I was thinking. What I was thinking was, you're measuring the wrong things. 3 rotations later, I showed Surevdas a footage clip. It was 47 seconds long. It showed a human male, one of their emergency response workers, what they call a firefighter, entering a structure that was actively collapsing and on fire. The thermal readings on our sensors showed the internal temperature had exceeded the threshold at which human tissue begins to break down. He went in anyway. He came out 2 minutes later carrying a child that was not his own. A child he had never met. A child belonging to a family from a different nation, a different culture, a group that, according to our own social conflict analysis, his demographic had been in active political tension with for decades. He carried her out, set her down, turned around, and went back in. There was no one else left inside. The building collapsed 30 seconds later. He survived. Barely. When a reporter asked him afterward why he went back in when the child was already safe, he looked confused by the question. There might have been someone else, he said. Surevdas watched the clip in silence. Then he said, that's irrational. Yes, I said. He could have died. Yes. For strangers. Yes. Surevdas looked at me. What is your point, analyst? I pulled up the threat assessment report. I pointed to the line that read soft. My point, I said, is that you measured their bodies. You never measured what's inside them. He didn't understand what I meant. I'm not sure I fully understood it yet either. But 42 rotations later, after what happened on the Kaeven Border, after what the humans did out there, in the dark, with nothing but broken ships and each other, I understand it now. And I don't know how to put it in a report. Because there is no classification in the Accord's entire 10,247 species database for what these people are. There is no box to put them in. There is no precedent. There is only the footage. Still playing on my screen. On a loop, because I can't bring myself to close it. And one question that I keep returning to, the same question, rotation after rotation, that wakes me from sleep and follows me through my work and sits in the back of every calculation I attempt. If we had known, truly known, what they were capable of, would we have made contact at all? The Kaeven Border incident began, as most catastrophes do, with a decision that seemed reasonable at the time. 7 rotations before first contact with a human vessel, the Accord had received intelligence that a Vorreth raiding fleet was moving through the outer corridor of the Kaeven system. The Vorreth were not members of the Accord. They had never been offered membership. They were what our diplomatic division euphemistically classified as unaligned opportunists, which was the bureaucratic way of saying they took what they wanted from whoever could not stop them. The Accord dispatched a monitoring presence. 2 mid-class vessels. Enough to observe, record, and if necessary, issue a formal warning. Not enough to fight. The Accord did not fight. The Accord mediated, documented, and sanctioned. Fighting was considered a failure of process. The monitoring vessels arrived to find 3 things. First, the Vorreth fleet was larger than intelligence had suggested. Significantly larger. Second, they had already engaged a target. Third, the target was human. The human vessel was a deep-range explorer called the Endurance. I know that name now the way I know the names of my own family. I have watched that ship's final hours more times than I can count. I know every crew member by face. I know their voices. I know which ones were afraid and which ones didn't have time to be. The Endurance carried 41 crew members and was, by any tactical measure, not a warship. It was a science vessel. Long-range sensors, sample collection arrays, a small medical bay, 2 shuttle craft. It was armed only because Accord protocol required all vessels beyond the inner systems to carry defensive armaments, a formality, really. The kind of thing that looks responsible on a charter document and rarely leaves its housing. The Vorreth had hit them without warning and without communication. That was typical Vorreth. They did not negotiate before taking. They negotiated after, when the other party had no leverage left. By the time the Accord monitoring vessel Sorrenthas arrived on sensors, the Endurance had already taken 3 direct strikes. Its outer hull was compromised in 2 sections. It had lost primary propulsion. It was, in every clinical sense, a disabled target. The Vorreth fleet, 11 vessels, had stopped firing. This was also typical. The Vorreth did not destroy what they could take intact. They were patient in that way. They would wait for the crew to assess their situation, reach the obvious conclusion, and begin surrender proceedings. It was efficient. Why waste munitions when despair did the work for you? The commander of the Sorrenthas, a veteran of 30 years named Vorreth, opened a channel to the Endurance immediately. What he heard confused him. I have the audio transcript. I have read it so many times the words have worn grooves in my memory. Vorreth identified himself. Explained the Accord's presence. Advised the human crew that he was documenting the situation and would file a formal protest with the Vorreth fleet's regional authority. He offered to facilitate communication between the Endurance and the Vorreth commander to begin negotiation of terms. Terms. He used that word. Terms. As in, the terms of surrender. The terms of what would be taken and what, if anything, would be left. There was a pause of approximately 4 seconds. Then a human voice came back on the channel. Appreciate you reaching out. We're not quite ready for that conversation yet. Vorreth asked what conversation they were not ready for. Surrender, the human said. The voice was calm. Remarkably calm, Vorreth noted in his own log. Not the calm of someone who had accepted their fate. A different kind of calm. Focused. Like a blade before it moves. We've got a few things to try first. Vorreth looked at his tactical display. A crippled science vessel. 11 Vorreth warships. No reinforcements within range. No possible outcome that did not end with the Endurance in Vorreth possession. He told the human this. Not cruelly. Factually. He was trying to help. He believed he was offering them a path to the least suffering available. The human was quiet for a moment. Then, what's your assessment based on? Vorreth listed the factors. Hull integrity. Propulsion status. Weapons capability. Enemy numbers. Another pause. You left some things out, the human said. What things? The channel went quiet. Not dead, still open, still transmitting. Just quiet. And then the Endurance did something that Vorreth had never seen a disabled vessel do in 30 years of monitoring. It turned. Not away from the Vorreth fleet. Not toward open space and the slim hope of distance. It turned toward them. What happened in the next 4 hours, I have reconstructed from 17 different sensor feeds, the Sorrentha's observation logs, recovered Vorreth communication intercepts, and the Endurance crew's own internal audio, which never stopped recording, because the human assigned to ship's documentation kept her station until the very end. Her name was Specialist Yora Okone. She was 26 years old. She had been on her first deep-range assignment. She had a photograph taped to her console of 2 older people I later identified as her parents, standing in front of a large body of water, squinting into sunlight. She kept recording. Because of her, we know everything. The Endurance could not run. Its captain, a woman named Commander Dara Reyes, had assessed this in the first 90 seconds after the attack and moved past it. I have watched her in the bridge footage and she does not look like a person processing catastrophe. She looks like a person solving a problem. There is a difference. Most species, when facing annihilation, process. Humans like Dara Reyes solve. She had 11 enemy vessels and 3 functioning weapons arrays, one of which was the defensive kind that exists on paper and rarely leaves its housing. She also had 40 crew members. And the 4 hours before the Vorreth grew impatient. What she did with those 4 hours is what broke my report. It is what broke me. She did not spend those hours preparing to surrender. She did not spend them on last communications to families, though some of her crew did that quietly, on personal channels, in the minutes between assignments. She spent them turning a science vessel into something the Vorreth had no framework for. She flooded non-essential corridors with vented plasma and rigged them to the airlock sequencing systems. She had her engineers strip the sample collection arrays, equipment worth more than the ship's annual operational budget, and repurpose the magnetic housing units into something that a human weapons specialist later described to investigators as creative. She pulled power from life support in the lower decks, which meant the crew in those sections worked in cold that registered on our sensors as dangerous, and not one of them asked her to stop. Nobody asked her to stop. That is the part one keep returning to. 40 people. Cold, injured, 6 had been wounded in the initial strike, facing 11 warships, with no rescue coming. And when their commander began doing the difficult, painful, expensive work of refusing to lose, every single one of them moved to help her. No dissent in the audio record. None. One crew member, a young engineer named Tomas Vega, whose workstation was in one of the cold sections, can be heard in the background of a command channel exchange saying something to a colleague. Specialist Okom's recording picks it up faintly. He said, "If we're going out swinging." His colleague laughed. They laughed. And then they went back to work. Vorreth Vael watched all of this on sensors and did not understand what he was seeing. In his log he wrote, "The human crew appears to be engaged in repair activity, though the nature and purpose of the modifications are unclear. Psychological assessment, possible denial response. Species may be incapable of accepting tactical reality. Recommend continued observation." I do not blame him for getting it wrong. We had studied 10,247 species. We had models for every psychological response to imminent destruction. Denial. Collapse. Bargaining. Acceptance. We had subclassifications and cultural variants and historical precedents stretching back 4,000 years of accord observation. We did not have a model for this. We did not have a word for a crew that looked at 11 warships and did not ask, "How do we survive?" but instead asked, "How do we make them regret this?" I have a word for it now. The humans gave it to me. They call it defiance. And I had no idea, watching those sensor feeds, watching Vorreth Vael watch in confusion, watching the Vorreth fleet grow slowly restless at the delay, I had no idea what was about to happen. None of us did. The Vorreth commander's name, as best as our translation systems could render it, was Grueth Ven. He had been raiding the outer corridors for 19 years. He had taken 43 vessels in that time. Cargo ships, research platforms, one Accord diplomatic cruiser that had strayed too close to unaligned space and whose crew had been ransomed back at considerable expense. He was not cruel by Vorreth standards. He was simply professional. He took things. That was his function. He had never lost a vessel. He had never been made to wait. After 3 hours and 40 minutes of watching the disabled human ship make inexplicable internal modifications, he opened a direct channel and issued a final demand. Standard Vorreth protocol. You have until I count to whatever number I choose. Then we stopped being patient. Commander Reyes responded immediately. Not with surrender terms. With a question. How many of your ships can you afford to lose? There is a recording of the Vorreth bridge in that moment, intercepted by the Sorrentha's passive array. I have watched it many times. Vorreth Ven's crew looks at each other with an expression that our xenopsychology team later classified as confusion preceding amusement. One crew member makes a sound that translates roughly as a laugh. Another gestures toward the sensor display, as if to say, "Look at what is asking us this question." Vorreth Ven himself pauses for a long moment. Then he responds. "None," he says. Because that is the honest answer, and the Vorreth are at least honest about their arithmetic. But that is not a relevant question. "It will be," Reyes says. The channel closes. 8 minutes later, the Endurance fires. I want to be precise about what happened next, because imprecision would be a disservice to the reality of it. The Endurance was not a warship. Nothing Commander Reyes had done in those 4 hours changed that fundamental truth. She did not have the firepower to destroy 11 Vorreth vessels. She did not have the hull integrity to survive a sustained exchange. She did not have the propulsion to maneuver aggressively or create distance or choose her engagements. What she had done, in those 4 hours, was something different. She had made the Endurance expensive. That is the only word I can find for it, and I am not entirely satisfied with it, but it is the closest to accurate. She had looked at her broken ship and her 40 people and the mathematics of her situation, and she had asked not how do we win, but how do we make winning cost them more than it's worth. The first thing she fired was not a weapon. It was the sample collection array housing, the repurposed magnetic units her engineers had stripped and rebuilt in the cold lower decks. It released on a precise vector toward the 2 lead Vorreth vessels, and what it released was not a projectile in any traditional sense. It was a cascading electromagnetic pulse wrapped around a core of vented reactor plasma, shaped by the magnetic housing into something that had no official name because no one had ever built one before. Tomas Vega had built it. 24 years old, 3rd-year engineer, first deep-range assignment. It took out the navigation systems of both lead vessels simultaneously. Not destroyed. Disabled. They were still there, still armed, still dangerous, but suddenly blind and unable to coordinate with the fleet. The Vorreth response was immediate and overwhelming. 6 vessels opened fire at once. The Endurance took for direct hits. I have the thermal imaging. I know what for direct hits from Vorreth mid-class weapons do to a ship that size. I know what it means for the people inside. 2 crew members died in those seconds. A man named Petrov, a woman named Ansel. I know their names because Specialist Ocone kept recording and said their names out loud when it happened, quietly, like she was marking something in the air. The Endurance, Vorreth Vael, watching from the Serenthas, sent a second communication. Urgent this time. His log records his own emotional state as significantly elevated, which for an Accord observer of 30 years was the equivalent of screaming. He told Reyes her ship could not take another volley. He told her the Accord was formally requesting she stand down to prevent further loss of life. He told her that 2 of her people were already dead and that the Accord would pursue every diplomatic avenue available to secure the return of her crew. Diplomatic avenues. That is what he offered her. She did not respond to Vorreth Vael. What she did instead, she fired the second thing. The plasma-flooded corridors. She had rigged them to the airlock sequencing. What that meant, in practice, was that she vented sections of her own ship, deliberately, in a controlled sequence, creating a series of explosive decompressions on the port side that functioned as crude but effective positioning thrusters. The Endurance moved. Not gracefully. Not the way a ship with functioning propulsion moves. It lurched and shuddered and pieces of its outer hull came away in the process, but it moved, and it moved toward the Vorreth fleet rather than away, and the vector it chose was specifically toward the 2 disabled lead vessels. Vorreth Ven had been raiding for 19 years. He had never seen a dying ship charge. His fleet's firing pattern broke. 3 vessels held. 3 pulled back, not much, just slightly, just enough to recalculate. 1 moved to cover the disabled leads. The tight coordinated formation that made the Vorreth fleet so effective became, in those seconds, something slightly less than that. That was all Reyes needed. The third thing she fired was the actual weapons array. the defensive armaments that existed on paper. In the confusion of the formation break, with 2 lead vessels blind, with 3 ships recalculating and 1 repositioning, there was a window of approximately 11 seconds where 2 of the Vorreth vessels had overlapping blind spots in their defensive coverage. She put everything the Endurance had left into those 11 seconds. 1 Vorreth vessel lost its weapons systems entirely. Another took engine damage severe enough to take it out of the engagement. 3 out of 11. A crippled science ship had taken 3 out of 11. Gruethven, who had never lost a vessel in 19 years, had just lost the functional equivalent of 2.5 ships. And the Endurance was still there. Still transmitting. Still in his sensors. Broken nearly beyond recognition, bleeding atmosphere from 3 sections, down to 38 crew members, but still there, still pointed at him, still, his fleet could finish it. He knew that. Another coordinated volley and the Endurance was done. Reyes had spent everything. There was nothing left to rig, nothing left to repurpose, nothing left to vent. She had emptied the ship of every trick it had. Gruethven knew this. And yet, he sat in his command chair and looked at his sensor display and did what he had never done in 19 years of raiding. He hesitated. Vorreth recorded his own observation of that hesitation. It lasted 40 seconds. 40 seconds in which the Vorreth fleet held its fire and Gruethven sat motionless and the Endurance drifted in the dark, trailing debris and atmosphere, waiting. In his personal log, not the official record, the private one that his family shared with Accord investigators after his retirement, Vorreth wrote something I have read more times than I can count. He wrote, "I do not think Gruethven was afraid of the ship. I think he was afraid of the people inside it. I think he looked at what they had done with nothing and asked himself what they would do if they ever had something. I think he decided the answer to that question was a problem he did not want to own." Gruethven opened a channel to Reyes. He said, "What do you want?" Not, "We accept your surrender." Not, "Prepare to be boarded." Not any sentence that had ever come out of a Vorreth commander's mouth after an engagement. "What do you want?" Reyes answered without hesitation. "My people. My ship. Safe passage to Accord space." A pause. "Your ship is not worth taking," Gruethven said. Which was true. The Endurance was wreckage at this point. No cargo of value, no systems worth salvaging. "No," Reyes said. "It isn't." Another pause. Longer this time. "The Accord vessel," Gruethven said. "It will escort you." Vorreth, who had been listening to this entire exchange with what his log describes as an emotional state for which I have no adequate category, responded immediately. Yes. He would escort the Endurance. He would personally guarantee safe passage. The Vorreth fleet held position for another 30 seconds. Then it turned. And left. Vorreth docked with the Endurance 40 minutes later. In his log he describes crossing into the human vessel and seeing the crew for the first time in person rather than on sensors. He had expected many things. He had expected the aftermath of what they had been through to be visible on them in the way it was visible on the ship, broken, depleted, barely holding shape. What he found was harder to describe. They were exhausted. Several were injured. 2 empty stations had names written above them on small pieces of material. He later learned this was something the crew had done themselves, within minutes of losing Petrov and Anselm, before the engagement was even over. They had stopped, in the middle of everything, and marked the places where their people had been. But they were not broken. That was the thing he could not reconcile with anything in 30 years of observation. Tomas Vega was asleep against a wall in the engineering section, still in his cold section gear, with a half-finished cup of something warm balanced on his knee. A colleague had put a thermal blanket over him without waking him. He was 24 years old and he had built a weapon out of science equipment in a freezing corridor while his ship was being shot apart, and he was asleep with a warm drink on his knee. Specialist Ocone was still at her station. Still recording. When Vorreth's team entered the documentation bay, she looked up and said, calmly, "We're going to need a lot of data storage for this one." And Commander Reyes. He found her last, in the captain's chair on the bridge, reviewing damage reports. She stood when he entered. She looked at him and he looked at her, and he did not know what to say, which had also never happened to him in 30 years. She spoke first. "Thank you for the escort offer," she said. "I wasn't going to take it before. I want you to know that wasn't about you. I just needed him to think there was a reason to stop." Vorreth asked her what reason that was. She smiled. And it was the kind of smile, he wrote in his log, that he had no classification for. Not triumph. Not relief. Something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. That it would cost him, she said. That's all anything ever has to do. I closed the footage file for the first time in 6 rotations tonight. I sat in the silence of my office and I looked at the blank report on my desk, and I thought about Grueth Ven asking what do you want and Reyes answering without hesitation, and Vega asleep against a wall and Ocone still recording, and 2 names written above 2 empty stations before the fight was even finished. I thought about what Surevdas said. They are soft. And I thought about what softness means. What it actually means. Not the absence of hardness. Not fragility. Something else entirely. I thought about a species that builds cathedrals while tearing itself apart. That runs into burning buildings for strangers. That laughs in cold corridors while the walls are being hit. That marks the names of the lost in the middle of the fight because the lost deserve to be marked, even then, even there. I thought about 38 people on a broken ship watching a fleet of 11 turn and leave because the math had changed. Because the cost had become something Grueth Ven could feel. And I thought about the question I've been carrying for 6 rotations. If we had known, truly known, what they were capable of, would we have made contact at all? I know the answer now. The answer is, it wouldn't have mattered. They were always going to find us. That's what you do when you're the kind of thing they are. You don't wait to be found. You go looking. And whatever finds you first, better hope it hesitates.